Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to talk about a country that made global headlines for its bold experiment with cryptocurrency, El Salvador. In 2021, El Salvador became the first nation in the world to make Bitcoin legal tender. At first, this move was seen as revolutionary. But in 2025, things have changed. El Salvador is now scaling back on its Bitcoin investments and policies. Why is this happening? What does it mean for the country, its people, and the world? Let's break it down in a way that's easy to understand. Back in September 2021, President Nayib Bukele announced that El Salvador would adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, alongside the US dollar. This was a huge step. The government believed Bitcoin could solve several problems, reduce the country's dependence on the US dollar, make it easier and cheaper for Salvadorans living abroad to send money home, attract new investments and boost the economy, and present El Salvador as a leader in financial innovation. President Bukele, known for his tech-savvy image, wanted to show the world that El Salvador could be at the cutting edge of technology and finance. At first, there was a lot of excitement. The government even launched a digital wallet called Chivo, giving away free Bitcoin to encourage people to use it. But soon, problems started to appear. Many Salvadorans didn't trust Bitcoin because of its price swings. Businesses were required by law to accept Bitcoin, but most preferred the stability of the US dollar. Technical issues with the Chivo wallet made it hard for people to use, and the value of Bitcoin dropped sharply at times, making people nervous about using it for everyday purchases. In a survey conducted in 2024, it turned out that 92% of Salvadorans didn't use Bitcoin for transactions. Most people, honestly, just didn't see the point. By 2024, El Salvador really needed more money to support its economy, so the country turned to the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, for a $1.4 billion loan. The IMF is, a pretty powerful global organization that lends money to countries in need, but it also sets some strict rules for how that money can be used. The IMF had always been worried about El Salvador's Bitcoin policy. They believed that using Bitcoin as a national currency was, pretty risky. Why? Because Bitcoin's price can change a lot in a short time, which makes it tough to plan government budgets or pay back loans. So, as a condition for the loan, the IMF told El Salvador to scale back its Bitcoin experiment. This meant that businesses no longer had to accept Bitcoin, they could just choose whether to accept it or not. Bitcoin could not be used to pay taxes or government bills anymore. The government would, gradually unwind its involvement with the Chivo wallet. And finally, the legal status of Bitcoin was downgraded. It was no longer called a currency, but it did remain legal tender. Let's look at the changes in detail. So, now businesses can decide if they want to accept Bitcoin. It's no longer mandatory. People can't use Bitcoin to pay taxes or government debts anymore. Bitcoin is still legal tender, but it's not officially called a currency anymore, and the government is stepping back from its digital wallet project, letting the private sector take over. These changes took effect in early 2025, following a vote in El Salvador's Legislative Assembly. The main reason is simple: money. El Salvador needed the IMF loan to support its economy, pay off debts, and attract more foreign investment. The IMF made it clear that the loan would only be approved if the government reduced its reliance on Bitcoin. There were also practical reasons. Most Salvadorans weren't using Bitcoin anyway. The government's Bitcoin policy was unpopular with the public. Bitcoin's price volatility made it risky for the country's finances, and international investors and lenders were hesitant to work with a country that used such a volatile currency for official business. Even though the government has scaled back its Bitcoin policies, it hasn't stopped buying Bitcoin altogether. In fact, El Salvador continues to add to its Bitcoin reserves. As of April 2025, the country holds over 6,100 Bitcoins, worth more than $500 million. So, why keep buying Bitcoin? Well, the government sees it as a long-term investment. They hope that, in the future, the price of Bitcoin will rise, giving the country a financial boost. The director of the National Bitcoin Office said that El Salvador wants to keep its first-mover advantage in the crypto world. Did the Bitcoin experiment work? Well, the answer really depends on who you ask. Supporters say El Salvador is ahead of its time, and the country's Bitcoin reserves have actually made a profit since the initial investment. Over the past year, the value of the country's Bitcoin holdings increased by over $100 million, even though there were some losses in 2025 due to price drops. On the other hand, critics argue that the experiment failed to deliver on its promises. Most Salvadorans don't use Bitcoin, and a lot of businesses just ignore it. The government's push for Bitcoin was pretty unpopular, and the country had to scale back to get international support. So what can other countries learn from El Salvador? El Salvador's experience offers some important lessons for any country thinking about adopting cryptocurrencies. First, public support really matters. For any new policy to work, people need to understand and trust it. In El Salvador, most people just didn't see the benefits of using Bitcoin. Another thing is volatility is a problem. Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin can gain or lose value quickly, which makes them risky for national economies. International relations also count, a lot. Countries need to work with organizations like the IMF and attract foreign investment, but radical policies can make this harder. And finally, change takes time. Even if a new idea is exciting, it needs careful planning and patience to succeed. So, what's next for El Salvador? Even after scaling back, El Salvador isn't giving up on its dream of being a leader in technology and finance. The government continues to promote crypto assets and new technologies. In January 2025, the country hosted the largest crypto conference in Central America, showing that it still wants to be part of the global crypto conversation. At the same time, El Salvador is focusing on broader economic reforms, improving transparency, and attracting more traditional investments. The IMF loan will help stabilize the economy and create new opportunities for growth. It really is a bold experiment. To sum up, El Salvador's Bitcoin experiment was bold and historic. It made the country famous around the world, and sparked debates about the future of money. But in the end, practical concerns, public opinion, and international pressure forced the government to scale back. El Salvador is still holding on to its Bitcoin and hopes that one day it will pay off. For now, the country is taking a more cautious approach, balancing innovation with economic stability. The world is watching to see what happens next. Will El Salvador's Bitcoin bet turn out to be a genius move or a cautionary tale? Only time will tell.